Hey there.
Hey, Andrea.
How you doing, Dustin?
Doing well.
Good. Have you been able to attend any didactics or anything today?
Yeah, actually, it's been a great SAM for me so far. I'm a program director, so we're all in small groups. So I've had
Yeah.
my interns behind me part of the day that they're participating in the conference. They're on SimWars right now, actually.
Oh, okay. Nice. Good. I'm glad it's been a good conference for you.
Yeah. How about you? Been busy, I'm sure.
Yeah. Had some hiccups, but it's there always is, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's
So,
virtual.
yeah, yeah. I'm looking forward to not being virtual next year. So
Me too.
it's a whole lot easier to handle stuff, face to face. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's in New Orleans too, right?
yeah, yeah, and apparently I wasn't here for it last time, but apparently it was a really great year.
Yep, I
So,
had fun last time.
yeah. Hi Shelby, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. All right. So, the speakers are not here yet, but um when they get here, hopefully in soon, we'll let them like open up their slides and see, make sure everything looks good for them when they present. They may need someone to man the chat. I'm not sure. Some people bring their own people in to man it, and some people don't think of that. So that would be great if you guys could help out. And Dustin is introducing them, so we'll let them know that.
Hey, Shelby. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Dustin.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Where are you coming from?
So I'm in Brooklyn, New York right now. I just matched into EM at a University of Rochester.
Oh, awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Super
Awesome.
excited.
Yeah, it was an interesting interview season and year all
Yeah,
around. So I'm sure you are super excited to get some in-person time. So that's awesome.
yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely zoomed out at this point.
Yeah. It's been definitely an interesting day. I had given Juno all the names of the moderators so that they could have moderator access, but apparently that got mixed up because several people have multiple accounts. So apparently, if you logged in with the wrong account, then people were like, I can't get in, I can't get in. So, I mean, I'd have like 3 people that couldn't get in like every hour. It was like crazy town.
I've been having that issue too. I think I actually have 2 SAEM accounts now because my residency program just got me one, but I already had one. So now I'm like, which is it? Like one of them has access to the conference and one doesn't. So
Yeah, better get that like fixed while you're thinking of it, because that causes all kinds of problems.
what should I do? Should I just email like IT and just tell them to
Yeah,
join them?
or you can do that and just make sure that they'll merge it for you.
Cool.
Where are you out of, Dustin? I'm looking UT Southwestern, huh?
Yeah. Oh, you got good eyes. That's really
Yeah,
small up there. I can't even see it. But yep. I'm UT Southwestern in Dallas.
nice.
One of my good friends just matched there, but for Gen Surge.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, we work closely with those guys. And it's a big program too, so it's cool.
Yeah, he's from Texas, so he's super happy to be coming back.
That sounds like us. If we leave, we're likely to come back. I did the same thing. I'd love to come back. Andrea, anything else that I need to do? You mentioned to introduce our speakers, and then,
Well,
like I said, me and Shelby can both moderate the chat as needed.
yeah, yeah. So when the speakers get on, we'll ask them because, like I said, it varies. Some people bring in like a whole team of their own
Sure.
thing and completely man it. Some people may want you to, if you kind of think up a good couple of good questions throughout the presentation, if the questions lull or something, you can kind of facilitate that. But other than that, just
Help
enjoy.
out. Okay.
Yeah, they've been really, really good so far. I've I'm not even a doctor and I've been enthralled. So
Yeah, I was on for the ADIEM had a virtual escape room. Some of these things I'm just like, people are so creative. I was like, how are you going to flex to a virtual Sim Wars,
yeah,
Uno games, and virtual escape room? So it was, I think it's just so cool to see how innovative people have been.
yeah, right. Mm-hmm. I agree. It has been, well, COVID has made us all become very adaptable. Let's see here. Whew. Oh, it says Sim Wars winner is UT Southwestern.
I was nervous. I had to jump off to come moderate, and so that's a vote down. So you go UT Southwestern.
Yep.
Those were some fun cases too that they were doing.
One sec, I gotta type something. Got some emergency here.
Do we have contact with our presenters? We know where they're at.
No, I do not. Here is, I have a list though. So we have, oh, I added this one. I don't know what the presenters are. 1 second. I just got added to this like at the last minute. You there?
Yeah, are you in your educational policy?
I am, but I realized I just got added to it the last minute and
There's one for 5:30, right?
right. I was gonna see who the presenters are.
Because the speakers are in the waiting room.
Are all of these speakers?
Yeah, those are all the speakers.
Okay,
You can let them in.
gotcha. They haven't been in there for very long, I don't think.
Staying muted because there are people.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, sorry, we're still in the Juno platform. Do we exit Juno now?
Yeah, you can exit it if you want.
Okay, great.
And who needs co-hosting abilities here?
Max Griffith.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. My name is Andrea Ray. I'm the SAM liaison. And we have Dustin Williams, who's going to be your moderator. And Shelby Wood is a medical student ambassador. So we're all here to support you. So first of all, I don't know if you have thought about anybody manning the chat questions, but either Dustin or Shelby can do that for you if you need that. And did you want to put up your slides so we can make sure that they look good?
Sure. Yeah, I can share my screen if that was all right.
Yeah. So I'm going to be on the whole time. I'm going to, yep, it all looks good. I'm going to be on the whole time. I'll mute myself, but I'll only be a holler away if you guys need anything. Okay. And so I'll let everybody else in at the top of the hour. Do you guys have any questions for me, for us?
Andrea, this isn't relevant for this session because we're not doing breakout rooms, but
Yeah.
I'm giving a couple other talks where we are. Is that going to be an option for, will there be the breakout room icon if you're a host?
Yeah, you can have the SAM staff member give you co-host abilities and you'll be able to do a breakout room, although are they didactics?
This is like an hour-long session on Friday, and we were going to do it at the end.
Okay.
Have they been not working that well? Do you advise against it?
Yeah, we don't usually, advise to do that. I mean, if you absolutely want to do it, then that's great. I would try and maybe get it set up if you can previously ahead of time. I was just in a session a little while ago that a lot of time was eaten up, like making the breakout rooms. So I don't know how you guys want to do that, but
yeah, so it might be best to not do it then.
yeah, so but we're there. You do have the ability if it comes down to it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How many people on average have been attending most of the sessions? And
yeah, it's been like a dozen. Some had like maybe 6 to a dozen.
Okay, so they've been a smaller
yeah
sessions. That's helpful. Thank you.
I think because people can bounce around to different sessions. So also, how would you like Dustin to introduce you? Like you can say your first and last name and institution, or is there a certain way that you'd like to be introduced?
I was honestly just, sorry, this is still for this talk? Or
Yeah,
I was just going to, on our title screen, introduce the four of us. I'm fine with that.
okay,
So,
okay.
Yep. Well,
thank you though.
that works for me too. I'm happy to help out any way you guys would like.
Okay.
But I can hang out in the background, generate questions if you guys need. If there's any specific questions you'd want me or Shelby to throw out in the end, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I can just brainstorm during the lecture as well.
Sure. For the other panelists, were we thinking probably questions all at the conclusion? Because we have, 3 or 4 small separate little talks. Mary and Rob and Chad.
Sorry, Max, what was your question?
Dr. Williams offered to moderate the chat and ask it, or be a plant for any questions we wanted asked in particular.
Okay.
And I was saying we probably want, if there's time for questions, just at the end of the whole presentation, right? Rather than sort of interspersed.
Dustin, you're gonna regret volunteering to help because we're gonna have you participate in the mock educational autopsy at the end. So when Max gives a presentation on snake bites, you too, Shelby. When Max give a presentation on snake bites, we would just ask if you could pay attention so that way when Rob leads the educational autopsy on it, you can share your feedback. How's that?
Happy to help. Yep. Sounds wonderful.
I'll do my best.
And sorry, Shelby, that might be out of the scope of what you're expected to do.
Voluntold.
That's okay. I'm also going to be tweeting stuff while you guys are talking. Dr. Griffith and Dr. Brown, do you guys have Twitter accounts? I couldn't find you on there.
I do. What is it? That's a good question. Let me find out.
I'll just type mine into the chat.
Cool. Thank you.
I'll tweet too. Oh, Max, that's hilarious. I like how your G is a number. Was that your screen name?
I think it's just I don't really know how Twitter works, Mary. So I think my name is just Max Griffith.
Okay, I tweeted about it.
Oh my goodness.
Well, it's nice to meet you guys. Best of luck on your lecture. Look forward to seeing it, and look forward to seeing you guys next year in person.
Likewise, thank you.
Thanks for being here and volunteering your time, Dustin. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Whew.
Andrea, you have to be exhausted.
It's been an exciting day. I'm gonna sleep well tonight. How have you guys been enjoying the conference? Good?
Yeah.
Would you tell me if you weren't?
did y'all make y'all's backgrounds blurry?
I had to download the newest version of Zoom, and there's a background blur feature.
Oh, really?
Preferences, yeah.
Good to know.
It's great. That way you don't have to see the kitty castle and trampoline and various toys scattered across my basement right now.
I hate using Teams, Microsoft Teams, but they had that feature before Zoom, and that was like the only bonus feature in Teams that I like. But then I also like the view setting where it looks like people are sitting in chairs, like the audience view.
I have not seen that.
That's awesome. I didn't know that existed.
Is it too late? Can we reconfigure all of this? And what does the team think? Should I start right at 6:30? Should I give them 2 minutes to trickle in if they may be coming from other sessions?
You can probably give them a couple minutes.
Give them a couple minutes.
Andrea, also, if you want to, you can spotlight the 4 speakers' videos, or whoever is a host can do this so that they show up at the top so that everybody's seeing them all the time instead of just whoever, if you want to.
Okay. I can do that. Oh. There we go. Thanks for the suggestion, Shelby.
I'm way too experienced with Zoom at this point.
Yeah.
Shelby, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask Shelby, did you match already?
I did. I'm actually at University of Rochester.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. I interviewed with you guys and I loved your program too.
Yeah, Rochester be great too.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm moving in like 2 weeks.
One of our former residents is finishing his Tox fellowship and was starting as faculty there probably at the same time you're starting. His name's Dan Overbeek, so say hello to him for us.
Oh, cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, and his wife will be a Penn fellow, so I'm sure you'll see them both.
Cool.
I didn't know he was there. That's neat.
Yeah, July, not quite yet.
Well, about to be there.
We lost one in the waiting room.
No.
We waited a minute and the last one.
Well, we can let him in though, right? Or no?
Yeah, if you want to let him in.
Sure. I think
Wanna
that'd
do
be
it?
fine.
Okay. Here, I think she came back.
All right. Hi to everyone who's just joined us from the waiting room. We're just going to give 1 or 2 more minutes and then get underway with our talk. Thanks for being here. Okay, well, we can certainly get started with some background here. So, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This talk is called The Educational Autopsy, How to Engage Learners and Generate Quality Feedback for Lecturers. So we are all coming to you from the University of Michigan. There's myself, Max Griffith. Hi, I'm a third year resident here. We also have Chad Brown, who is a soon to be graduating fourth year resident. We have Mary Haas, who is one of our faculty members, assistant residency program director. And finally, Rob Wong, who is our residency program director. So without further ado, this presentation is all about how we can help presenters become better at presenting, which makes me feel a little bit of pressure as a presenter for you, but I just thought I'd put that out there. So to start, I'd like you to all think about some of the best teachers you've ever learned from, whether that's in a lecture hall, a Zoom call, or at the patient's bedside. These educators didn't just appear overnight, right? Their teaching skills were cultivated over time, growing and eventually blossoming into the master educators that they became. So specifically today, we'll be talking a lot about the teaching that goes on during your required residency didactics. From my personal perspective, I'd say our residency's weekly didactics are pretty good, but there's obviously some variation in quality from session to session. There are some residents and faculty that we've all come to know as excellent lecturers. They clearly understand best practices for designing their lectures, and they know how to convey their message really clearly. And then there are also some faculty who, despite having lectured for many years, their lessons don't really seem to land for whatever reason. So what this talk is really about is how we can provide guidance for all residents and faculty so they can grow into strong lecturers delivering well-designed didactics. Just because you're here with us today, you're probably the type of person who already cares fairly deeply about residency didactics, but if you still need some more evidence or convincing why they're worth everyone's time to improve residency teaching skills, well, consider the numerous ACGME requirements or commandments, if you will. There are two of them which are particularly relevant to this talk. So ACGME, they require structured didactics as part of the EM residency training experience. So this is now something that will be going away. Didactics will continue to be a pretty big part of everyone's training experience for quite some time. The ACGME also requires that faculty and residents receive formal feedback. Now, this can be for clinical work. It can also be for other educational opportunities, such as for lectures they give. And now to focus a little bit on that second point, let's briefly review the concept of feedback. So feedback, you can conceptualize it as the communication of information on performance in comparison to a standard in an attempt to create growth and engender progress. So there are several widely agreed upon components for quality feedback. It should be timely. So obviously learners do not get as much from the feedback if it's provided weeks after they complete some task or presentation they've long since forgotten. It should be specific. So the goal is to base feedback on particular observed behaviors. Generalizations such as good job, well done, are not particularly informative. They don't lead to evolution of skills. Feedback should be balanced. So if you provide negative feedback alone, that's likely going to subvert some of the positive qualities of the learner and will probably impair the receiver's ability to internalize and use the feedback. And then finally, feedback should be actionable. So quality feedback should allow the learner to react and to reflect upon information they're receiving with the intent of forming an action plan for future development. So with that understanding of the importance of feedback and some of the attributes of quality feedback, you'll probably see that the way our residency used to generate feedback for our lecturers was suboptimal. So here's the form we used to use. Historically, our residency conference audience would receive this form for each of several weekly presentations. So you can imagine 4 to 5 hours of clustered didactics each week. So often each faculty or resident is receiving 6 to 8 of these evaluation requests after the weekly conference. People generally reflected that these evaluations felt more like busy work than actually useful feedback. They were often not completed. When people did complete the forms, they used the Likert scale, but skipped the opportunities for free text. And then when they did provide free text occasionally, it would often be short, non-specific statements, again, such as good job. Responses rarely included the action plans for development that we thought were so important. So we felt that a lack of quality feedback was diminishing the opportunity for presenter reflection and development. So enter the educational autopsy. In response to challenges collecting feedback for didactics, we began using this post-conference debrief tool called the educational autopsy. It's facilitated by members of education leadership. It involves all interested residents from that day's conference. So our residency has used the educational autopsy starting in July 2016. And over time, it's actually come to replace those traditional evaluation surveys completely as our primary means of generating feedback from didactics. Educational autopsy has multiple goals. So I'd say its primary goal is to generate quality feedback for presenters. Again, all those things, timely, specific, balanced that we talked about. An additional goal, the secret mission, as Rob Wong likes to describe it, is that educational autopsy also encourages participants to think critically about educational methods and materials as they're absorbing them. So all the participants in the ed autopsy will also be equipped with these tools to deliver engaging, effective didactics in the future. It fulfills a few secondary administrative goals as well. So it allows the training program to identify both particularly strong presenters and those who might need a little bit of focused development, and also to determine which talks are valuable, should be continued, which ones might need to be refined or replaced in the curriculum. And then finally, it provides formal feedback in the form of its written summary reports that can go to an educator's teaching portfolio or promotion packet. So I'm just going to delve briefly into some nuts and bolts of the educational autopsy, but really Mary Haas will be covering some of these more thoroughly momentarily. So how it works is at the conclusion of each weekly conference, one assigned faculty member and any available residents convene to reflect on each presentation. Conference presenters dismiss themselves while the group discusses their sessions, and then all the participants will provide feedback on areas of effective instruction as well as areas for improvement. The faculty facilitator's job is to collate this feedback and enter it into an aggregate online survey. That survey is then shared to each presenter. So here is the form that facilitators use to guide the discussion for each didactic in the educational autopsy. You'll see that it examines three important components of presentations. After I stop talking, Chad Brown will be delving a little deeper into each of these components and highlighting some of the best practices for each. But just in brief, you see that we talk about presentation design. This reflects the content of the session, slide design, whether the visuals and media were of high quality and whether they were effective. It also touches upon presentation style, things like use of humor, asking questions, body language, how fast are they speaking. And then finally, we talk about the educational methods that the presenter used. So generally speaking, was the presentation choice appropriate for the format? Would it be best served as a standard lecture, maybe case-based, maybe rapid image questions or some kind of interactive trivia like the Kahoot app that we sometimes use. So fairly early on, we noted some unevenness from session to session. Part of this was depending on which faculty was facilitating and which residents were present. So we found it was very helpful to establish some general ground rules, and these ground rules were shared with facilitators ahead of each session. So some of the most important ones are constructive feedback only. So again, feedback should be regarding observed behaviors. It shouldn't be personal attacks on people or their mannerisms. Generally speaking, what is said at EA does not leave EA. So the only time that that feedback is repeated outside of that small group is when the presenter receives their formal feedback form. And then we found that having presenters and also faculty, aside from the faculty facilitator, leave the room for the educational autopsy helps promote more honest and open feedback. So that's sort of a whirlwind overview of why we created the autopsy. Here are my photo credits and some references for the slides that I've made so far. And here's just the general outline for the rest of our presentation. We're done with part one. Part two will be Chad, who will review some of the best practices for presentations. And then following that, we'll have Mary Haas discuss how to give and collect effective feedback. Finally, we will have Rob Wong lead us through a real live educational autopsy. So Chad, please take the mic whenever you're ready.
Yeah, for sure. So while ideally there should be organic discussion for each presentation, we found that that's not always the case. In those situations, we found that evaluating each presentation based on the basis of best practices for each category is a useful way to provide feedback. Speaking specifically for presentation design, in order to effectively provide high quality feedback on presentations, it's important to understand what the best practices for those presentations include. Much of what we know about this topic is covered under the broader category of multimedia learning. This refers to learning from both words and pictures. Words can be seen or heard because they can be communicated in print. or through spoken narration, and then pictures can be static or dynamic through the form of animations or videos. Most presenters use PowerPoint to incorporate this multimedia learning. We know that most people default to using PowerPoint, just bullet point text, which creates that phenomenon of death by PowerPoint. There's been a lot of evidence-based multimedia design principles that guide presenters in delivering content more effectively, which is based on the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. Delving into this theory is beyond the scope of this presentation, but the point I want you to know is that a researcher named Mayer has studied these extensively and created a helpful list of principles called Mayer's principles, which you see listed in the table above. Reading these is pretty boring and difficult to interpret, so I'm going to give a more practical summary. Mayer emphasized that educators need to design the instructional message in a manner that will facilitate students' cognitive learning processes. From this, they provide some very practical suggestions. So external distractors, both verbal and pictorial, should be eliminated when designing the slides. Basically, it's just simpler is better. Educators should match the information load they intend to present to the allotted time for the educational activity. This requires appropriate scope identification and adjustment when designing the presentation. Information load presented should not exceed the learner's cognitive capacity to form appropriate mental frames of the topic at hand. And then educators should take the initiative to establish what students already know about the topic from other disciplines and use that information to build on in their presentation. This should facilitate the integration of newly presented material with the previously stored information that they already know. You can move forward, Max. I'm going to give a couple of examples of how to use these principles to improve presentations. So you can see a lot of them are based on slide design. This one's highlighting the multimedia principle, which basically says use words and pictures rather than words in isolation. So you can see the first slide is a bunch of words, and then second slide looks much better with that flow chart. You can go to the next slide, Max. The next one is highlighting this signaling principle, which, as opposed to just a bunch of words in that first slide, you see these arrows that are highlighting the specific things that they're trying to draw attention to. Next slide. And then this one is an example of the coherence principle, which is where you exclude unnecessary words, pictures, or sounds that sort of make every slide seem bulky, to make it a more sort of coherent slide that's highlighting those necessary things. This one also has the arrows, so highlighting that signaling principle as well. So next slide. Presentation style is much more difficult to provide feedback on, especially in our current climate of virtual lectures. The discussion of presentation style addresses issues such as body language and speaking style, as well as the presenter effectively engage the audience. Think of it as how effectively the presenter engaged the audience on a topic. So did the presenter appropriately use humor? Did they appropriately use silence, or did they ask a bunch of questions? Did they speak too quickly or too slowly? Did they say too often? Did they have an appropriate use of body language, or was it distracting? Was their presentation length too short or too long? And then were they able to appropriately answer questions at the conclusion of their presentation? Next slide. Educational methods refers to the techniques used by the presenter to cover the topic at hand. There's a wonderful paper written by one of our faculty, Meg Wolf, and her co-authors that describes the various active learning techniques that speakers can deploy. The actual concepts are beyond the scope of this presentation. I just wanted to make you aware that they exist and that many of these can be used to better engage learners in their presentations. The table describes a bunch of different ones. There's things like case-based learning or concept maps, where a diagram helps visualize relationships between concepts. Kahoot, which is actually a form of commitment activity versus image-based learning, is a frequently used tactic within our residency program. You can even use role-playing, which every resident learner in the country loves, role-playing. Next, I'm going to pass the virtual microphone to Mary, who's going to further discuss how to give effective feedback.
Thanks, Chad. So one of the things that doing educational autopsy successfully requires is faculty facilitators who have been trained and know how to do it well. And there's several best practices to keep in mind in order to run it effectively. Creating psychological safety is critical and can be really tough to do over Zoom because you don't always know who's in the room. You don't know how to read the room the same way that you might in a physical space. So creating psychological safety involves clearly communicating the session ground rules to everybody who participates and restating them at the beginning of the session. In our program, as Max mentioned, only residents and members of the program leadership team are present, so that everybody who's participating knows who's in the room and that the people in the room are committed to generating high quality feedback. We'll make an announcement before it starts that it's about to begin, and we'll manually remove anybody from the Zoom who shouldn't be there. We invite, but we don't force everybody to turn their camera on to make it easier to read the room. And we make sure that presenters are not there when their presentation is being discussed. Similarly, we don't record the session so that people feel comfortable to speak freely and honestly. Sometimes there can be silence when a presentation is brought up. And in this case, asking open-ended probing questions about specific aspects of the presentation can help guide the conversation. For instance, the facilitator might ask, what were your thoughts on the slide design? Or did the educational methods align with the content presented? These types of questions can trigger corresponding discussion, and having the feedback form up and visible, such as through sharing your screen, can be helpful to reference when coming up with which probing questions to ask. As the facilitator, avoid dominating the discussion and really use the session to create a space for the residents and other participants to analyze the presentation rather than frequently interjecting. It's definitely okay to interject, but when doing so, make sure to role model professionalism and high quality feedback as the faculty member, because you as the facilitator really do set the tone. It's also important to encourage differing viewpoints. For instance, if one person stated that they like a certain unique aspect of a presentation, you as the facilitator might ask, I heard so-and-so mention that one person appreciated this aspect. However, we recognize preferences may vary. Are there any others with a different perspective to provide? Some people might still feel uncomfortable providing constructive feedback out loud, or they might have feedback to share but can't necessarily stay after conference due to another conflict or having to go to shift. To address these potential pitfalls, you can provide a link to a form for people to include feedback anonymously in real time. And you can also consider showing the anonymous presentation feedback during the autopsy to stimulate discussion if there's periods of silence. Situating the feedback within evidence-based principles is important. We lecture our faculty and our residents yearly in conference on presentation design, and we include content on Mayor's principles so that they have some familiarity with them. Having Mayor's principles handy and sharing them on the screen, along with the feedback form, can inspire the group to give feedback in accordance with those specific guiding principles. Ultimately, feedback should be shared with the presenter in a timely fashion. We found our learning management system, MedHub, sometimes made this challenging. So we will also email feedback to the presenter, ideally immediately after the session is done and the facilitator has been able to compile it and write it in narrative form. In the past, we also used to email this out to the entire conference committee so that everybody could benefit from reading commonly received presentation feedback, and also just to normalize the culture of feedback in our program. You can see from the best practices described that faculty development is required to do educational autopsy well. Any faculty member participating in it should have familiarity with Mayor's principles, the components listed on the feedback form, and the expectations and process for conducting the session, summarizing and submitting feedback. We have a Google Doc that has detailed instructions, and we share it with all of our faculty facilitators. We also encourage them to sit in on sessions ran by experienced facilitators before running their own for the first time. Now let's get to an example of narrative feedback submitted in educational autopsies. So you can see how the quality and the richness differs from the traditional good job or needs work that you might get on individual feedback forms, and how the narrative summary can be used to better meet the criteria for effective feedback. So here's an example of presentation design feedback. You can see the participants appreciated that Dr. A's slides used high resolution images and minimized text. They thought that opening the presentation by jumping right into the pathophysiology was less engaging, and suggested opening with a case presentation relevant to the content presented instead. In the next slide, you can see how this is an example of specific feedback that's balanced. There's both things that the presenter did well and ways the presenter can improve, and there's an action plan for next time that's highlighted in blue. For presentation style, the feedback is, the participants appreciated Dr. A's effective use of humor throughout the presentation. The lecture went about 10 minutes over time. Having a timer open during the presentation or timing himself when practicing may help avoid this in the future during a higher stakes lecture, such as a national conference. And you can see similarly here that this is balanced, specific, and includes an action plan. For educational methods, Dr. A successfully incorporated Kahoot at the end of his session, and the residents appreciated the opportunity to apply the knowledge of the content he covered in the lecture to the questions at the end. They did note that it took a while for all of the participants to log in, which may have contributed to the presentation going over time. Including fewer questions or allotting more time for the Kahoot may help with future iterations. And you can see here again, there is both positive and constructive elements of the feedback, as well as a specific suggestion as to how to make it better. With that, we'll move on to the next portion of the session. And during this, Max will present an example presentation. It's not intended necessarily to be the gold standard presentation, so don't be afraid to give feedback. And then Rob will facilitate a sample educational autopsy with all of you participating and providing your feedback and analysis.
All right, thank you very much, Mary. And hi, everyone again. So, right, here is my semi-serious lecture for you all. This is a case that I saw as an intern. My lecture is entitled Snake Bitten, a case of crotaline envenomation. So the case, the triage note read that day that there's a suspected bite from a Massasauga rattlesnake to the right inner ankle of the patient. The patient had pain, but otherwise no symptoms. And vital signs are what you see here, not particularly remarkable. So physical exam, I did note 2 fang marks noted inferior to the right medial malleolus. There's no active bleeding, maybe a little bit of local edema. Otherwise, the exam's not too impressive. So before we go any further with this talk, I thought it would be useful to hear from a national expert on snakes. Can you guys hear the audio? Okay, there's closed captions. All right, thank you, Nick Cage. So for my medical decision-making portion that day, I wrote she has no systemic signs on presentation, did have a brief episode of nausea, but this resolved on its own. And based on that, we said this is probably a dry bite. So we didn't give any anti-venom. We opted to observe. We did some basic wound care there, got some labs, and then I ended up signing this patient out to the oncoming resident for observation. That's the snake up there in the top left. Here were the initial labs. I thought, okay, nice. And I went home to enjoy my dinner that night. I checked the chart later, and I saw that her labs and her clinical course took a bit of a turn. So now she has a very elevated D-dimer on repeat labs. Fibrinogen has dropped significantly, and then her coagulation factors are also fairly elevated since admission. Also, the next provider was kind enough to take this picture you see here of the ankle in question. You can see the 2 fang marks below the malleolus, but then she did have some spreading edema, ecchymosis, which was actually pretty dramatic, and she did need several doses of IV pain medication. So I read about this in Tintinales, and I came across this statement here. It cannot be overemphasized that one can easily be deceived by a bite that initially appears innocuous. Unremarkable physical exam and lab tests at presentation do not reliably exclude significant envenomation. I thought that sounds exactly like what happened here. So in terms of some high points for the management of snake bites, specifically pit viper or crotaline envenomations. So first, like with any patient, you're going to want to assess them, do your ABCs. You're going to want to carry out your basic wound care. So things like washing the wound, updating their tetanus if needed, elevating and icing it, and pain control. After that, you're going to want to check for signs of envenomation. And for crotalines, these include both local tissue injury, so edema, ecchymosis, things like that, and also lab abnormalities or a clinical picture concerning for DIC or coagulopathy. So you're going to want to get an INR, PT, PTT, and you're going to want to look for any signs of DIC, any unusual bleeding, for example. So again, if it all appears reassuring to start, it's appropriate to undergo observation for the patient. It's generally agreed that they need at least 8 hours of obs, and you're going to want to repeat labs and exam every 4 to 6 hours. If they never develop any signs of DIC or worsening clinical picture, potentially appropriate for discharge with very close follow-up for recheck. Now, if upon any of these repeat exams or lab checks, they start trending in the wrong direction, at that point, you're probably going to want to admit them, and you're going to start administering antivenom. For crotaline snakes, the main antivenom on the market is Crofab. You're going to mix up 4 to 6 vials in normal saline, infuse it over an hour, and then 1 hour post-infusion, you're going to check everything again, all the labs, the exam. And again, if you feel like you've gotten control of the envenomation, you can stop and observe. But if things continue to trend the wrong direction, more Crofab, and repeat the process. Sometimes these patients will need ICU for frequent checks. So in summary, never assume a dry bite. You can hold off on giving antivenom, but you'll at least need to observe these patients and serially examine them and get labs. Know your signs of envenomation. Again, local tissue injury and also coagulopathy, DIC. And if you have concern for an envenomation, the treatment is antivenom and more antivenom. Thank you very much.
Okay, and now, Max, you don't actually have to leave, but like running like a educational autopsy, we'd say, okay, like now we'll wait for like all the presenters who will be reviewing to leave, and we will like run our autopsy. So thank you everyone for being here. As always, when running an educational autopsy, our goal is to give formative, constructive feedback to the presenter. It's important that we recognize that most presentations won't be perfect, and in presenting, we are hope that all the presenters want us to learn, and there are things that they're going to do very well. There are things for them to work on, and since feedback is the fuel that fans the flames of growth, this is our opportunity to like really give them that feedback. We don't get mean, we don't get personal, but we really want to try to dig into the things that were really effective, that we want to give them kudos for, and the things that distracted from what they're trying to do, so that when they present again, they will be able to specifically do work in those areas. So thinking about it broadly, we're going to run through presentation design. We're going to run through the presentation sort of style, the sort of like demeanor, the like art of presenting. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the educational methods. And I wanted to frame that just so you can start thinking in your mind about this presentation and these areas. So first, let's talk about the design. What did everyone think? And I encourage you all, like, come on camera if you're comfortable, like unmute your microphone. Your involvement in this will be very important. What did you think of the design of Max's presentation? What did you think about the slides themselves, about the way he set it up?
I'll go ahead and start, if that's okay. Well, first of all, I want to say Max sure is a fantastic presenter, even when he's trying not to be. He's still pretty darn good. As far as the design, I thought he had some slides that were a lot more effective than some of the other slides. Some of the slides were very, very text heavy, and I was having to read a lot. And then there was one slide where he had to go through a pretty complicated algorithm that I couldn't hardly see. And so I thought, those slides were not as effective as some of his other slides that had, the rattlesnake picture and the key points.
I really like that feedback from Max. I do think like he had like overall like a very good lecture. I think the text heavy slides, you bring up a really good point. It's as long as you're reading, it's hard to listen. So I think Max probably did run into a few different times where we're looking at the slides, we're reading the slides, and then you go, oh, shoot, you're talking about things that aren't on these slides and I missed it. I agree with you too on that algorithm. It was like very hard to see, like, and hard to follow. I think like feedback on the visual size would be good for him there.
I also think that the colors that he used were a little bit distracting. Like the background was yellow and some of the text was like light blue and some red. It was kind of unconventional colors and it made it a little bit hard to focus on the content because I was like squinting trying to read it.
Yeah, the use of the color red in presentations is complicated. It's a harsh color that like makes our eyes work. And when our like eyes are working and our brains are working to process, since our brains like at the end of the day, we are all like animals, and our like dumb animal brains, like the more work we're doing to take information in, like the harder it is to sort of learn. And I agree with you there that like yellow on blue combo, I'm like, oh, I like really like yellow and blue. I'm at Michigan, but still it's like a bit much. And the red text I think is a good example. We always use red to try to emphasize things, but it's like rarely as emphasized as like white on black or black on white. It's just different, and sometimes it can be muddled. I think like the like color design is like really good feedback for Max as well. Any other thoughts on his presentation design?
Yeah, Nick Cage is my man. But I was left a little bit disappointed in the video. I couldn't exactly tell if it was related, but then we had some kind of audiovisual issues as well. And I don't know if that was intentional or maybe not, but maybe checking AV stuff on Zoom prior or downloading to the hard drive. Or if it was completely unrelated or not adding, maybe that might have been distracting. I don't know. I really can't tell.
I really like that feedback. It's the like on one hand, if you're going to use audio or video or something different, you've got to like test it to death, right? You like never know what computer you're using, what platform you're using, like the way things are going to go wrong. But also maybe it could just go like I'm a notorious Nick Cage hater, so I had to like check my biases. Certainly, like Nick Cage comes up and I'm like, oh, I hate it already. But like specifically, I think like when we insert sort of like video or information for fun, there's always the risk that like it like envelops fun, like it envelops the presentation, and then like you lose some of the focus on the content. The only thing I remember about Max's first 3 slides was me grumbling to myself, ooh, Nick Cage, ooh. And so like that was probably not what he was hoping to get across. And I think that like it is like audio and video can be very effective, but it has to be used very cautiously. I think this is like really good feedback from Max there. Let's talk about the style of the presentation. That's always a little bit harder, and it's especially hard via Zoom, right? Like some of the typical feedback we can give about like how was your presence in the room, how did you play the audience, gets like a little more complicated. But like, what did you all think about how he was doing with the like just his overall demeanor as a presenter and those kind of core presenting skills?
I thought that his tone and pacing were pretty appropriate. He seemed to have, rehearsed the presentation. He seemed to know what he was talking about. He, looks prepared to give a presentation. He has his background blurred and he looks, professional. There were a couple times where he kind of paused for a long time and I wasn't sure if he was trying to remember something or just having issues with the slides or something, but I did notice a couple kind of like longer pauses in there.
I like that. It's the like presenting from Zoom, you like lose the how do you sort of play the room, but you gain the okay, like is your background ready? Are you framed? Like have you sort of like thought through like what people are going to see in that little box? Max has such lovely tone. I could listen to like Max talk about anything all day. I agree with you there. It's a very sort of like nice, sort of like focused tone. Did you think that because I love that you like talked about his tone and pacing. Do you think that his tone changed enough to sort of emphasize important things, or do you think he was pretty steady throughout?
It was pretty steady.
Yeah, I have like no problems at all with his tone. Something I always like to think about is if he had sort of stopped and sort of changed either like intonation or sort of emphasized in specific ways key points, like would that have like made his presentation, like would it have emphasized the like peaks in his presentations a little bit more? Because I agree with you, like his pacing was really nice, his tone was really nice. Maybe that's a place where it's like, hey, you can like pull in some other things. Anything else about his presentation style?
I had the benefit of already hearing Max speak, so I know he's flawless. So I thought he had thrown in a few and filler words during the presentation. And also kind of when he was highlighting some of the history and physicals, just kind of breezing through some of the things like, yeah, yada, yada, not exactly in those terms. But yeah, maybe, a few filler word here and there.
Yeah. Smoothing out the language, and also trying to make sure that like it is challenging, like when giving a presentation like this, to be able to teach to like all learner levels. And perhaps in his mind, as a like very seasoned senior resident, he's saying, you all know all this, and skipping through it, but remembering I am a dumb doctor from Michigan who does not see a lot of rattlesnake bites. Like, I, in fact, do need a little more time to process. And that's the sort of thing that we can definitely pull in for him. One other thing I'll add, and I'm interested to hear if you all notice this, he definitely had a few different pieces of, oh, I read this in Tintinallies, and he started off with, here's my fun presentation, which is doing that casual thing that we all do, where we are anxious about being an expert on something and not feeling like an expert, so we sort of self-undermine ourselves. I don't know if you all noticed that, because when he said, I read about it in Tintinallies, I thought, well, gosh, when we're doing presentations, who doesn't? Who doesn't read about it in a variety of different venues? And it was almost as if Max was trying to not give himself credit and to defer to someone else as the sort of expert there. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but that was something where I thought, oh, Max, you were good and you're doing a good job. You don't have to punish yourself in this way. Okay, let's move on. Let's just talk a little bit about the educational methods used. This was a short presentation. There were not a ton of different things used. It was a very case-driven presentation. He used a case to frame. Did you think that the case was used well? Were there other things that he did that like worked well or didn't work well?
I think that, like you mentioned, it's tough with such a short lecture. I thought one thing he did well was at least reiterating some of the key points. Like I think he had 2 slides with some key points on there. So I thought that was nice.
Yeah, I really like that. I like the use of summary slides. I like the saying something that is important multiple times. You never know when I am reaching for my Diet Coke and I stop listening or watching, but maybe I'll be able to get it the second time through. I really like that.
I don't know if this necessarily falls under this category, but I didn't notice any like audience participation elements. So there were times where he could have maybe said, what do you guys think would be the next step in the algorithm or the treatment that you would suggest or something like that to kind of engage the audience and make sure that they're listening and they're getting something out of the presentation.
I love that. It is not only good to sort of snap us back to it, especially in a virtual format where it's easy for us to get distracted by my 3 children waiting over in the hallway, waiting for me to be done, just staring at them. But I do really think that the use of that can also help sort of give the, hey, I'm going to ask a question about what I think is really important. And it forces a lot of people to think, it forces a lot of people to engage and do that same sort of emphasis, which I really like. I think this is really good feedback overall for Max. And obviously in sort of sending this to him and sort of the framing, we'll touch a little bit on the sort of like design things with the color scheme, with the sizing of images, with the audio video, with the recognition that he had a lot of really good presentation, like a lot of really good information. He needs to make sure the presentation is working with him and not against him. I will definitely compliment his like lovely lilting tone and pacing in his talk, and bring up that there were a few places where he bobbed a little bit, some prolonged pauses, some sort of filler words. And also make sure that we give him the feedback that he doesn't have to undermine himself. He's doing a great job. He should have the confidence that we have in him in the presentation. Finally, the case obviously was a good thing. It was nice that he was bringing in specific pearls, that he was having a summary slide, maybe doing a little bit more work of like audience participation, bringing in other techniques would help bring the presentation, which is already good, to the next level. Perfect. Thank you all for being here. That's the end of our autopsy. Yeah, we did it, everyone.
And in the chat, you'll see I typed some example summaries that might be how the discussion translates into what the facilitator might ultimately input into the feedback form. So you can see what that looks like.
Yeah,
Is
so at
this-
this point, go ahead,
Oh,
Shelby. I'm
sorry, I just had a quick
Please.
question. Is
Yeah,
this
perfect.
something that's done for every lecture at your program every time or only certain ones? Everyone?
Nearly every lecture. So I mean, we kind of, as we had like a steering committee that sort of met and over time refined the process a little bit. But pretty much every core lecture and every resident given lecture, we decided not to do like invited speakers. So grand round speakers, we don't really critique them. And if it's something like a town hall meeting, that's just like a discussion about a new policy, also less high yield. But we try to capture pretty much every didactic.
I've been trying to get Rob to let us critique grand round speakers for 3 years now, but he refuses. So
No, I should mention we have had several grand round speakers who explicitly say, no, I want feedback. And then it's like, let's do it. That's always like a tricky sort of like political climate for the like person who you've invited in. I think honestly, the like best answer is, hey, we do this. Do you want this sort of feedback for your lecture? And then like folks can opt in so that it's not like we have invited you for a lecture and then we're like, now how are you really presenting? But it'll allow us to like give them the feedback that really otherwise will be helpful.
And yeah, before that great question, I was merely going to open it up for questions. So if anyone else has any other questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, you guys at University of Michigan. I appreciate you letting me participate and take part in your educational autopsy. You know me, I am a fan of the morbid as a nightly watcher of forensic files. So thank you, and I appreciate that. I did have a few quick questions for you guys. Was your educational autopsy, did you guys do this with in person when you guys were in person learning, or is this something you incorporated during virtual? It sounds like it was before in-person lecture. And when you had to flex to virtual, did that kind of affect your attendance at all? In both positive or negative?
yeah, it seems like, I don't know what other people, but it seems like the attendance sort of waxes and wanes throughout the year. Like people will come a lot at the beginning of the year, especially new interns, and then it'll sort of like wane through the winter and then pick back up again in the like spring and summer. We did do it in person at the end of conference. We all just got together and like quickly went through all of the lectures. It usually takes like 15 or 20 minutes. And then we just did it on Zoom. We'd have people log off and we kick off all the attendings and just go through them all right on Zoom.
Yeah, I think the transition to Zoom was pretty smooth. The main things we run into are sort of promoting that safe environment like Mary was talking about. So we try to encourage people to turn on their cameras so you can actually see who's actually listening or who just left their computer on and like isn't actually present. I think the attendance has not been affected particularly by Zoom because people have a little more time built in now that they don't have to physically move places. And, the autopsy takes, 15, 20 minutes. So it probably evens out.
I would say we have on average like 5 to 10, sometimes more people participating each week, usually around 10. And that is out of a out of a program of 64 residents.
Awesome. Thank you. And then my next question is about faculty. You mentioned that kind of the faculty moderators were folks who were familiar with the process and kind of the objectives. Is this residency leadership, or is there all faculty are involved? You guys recruit from all faculty? Just curious.
It's predominantly the residency leadership. It's the PD, APD team, but also the medical education fellows. There are a few other faculty who have been very involved in the process, who have occasionally led some of these. It's a recognition that it's not meant to be exclusionary, but we also want folks who have experience with educational autopsies to help run them, to help facilitate.
You guys already answered one of my questions, was about grand round speakers. What about, do you guys also do the same feedback for program leadership, program director, chair lectures as well?
Yes. Yeah. Any of our faculty and residents who present are eligible to receive educational autopsy feedback, and the vast majority do. Occasionally, there will be times that there was a session that was geared toward like one class of residents, like the EM2 small group, and then somebody from that particular class year who attended the small group might not be present on educational autopsy. So that is one challenge. Occasionally, we won't necessarily have a participant in the session present at autopsy. And so that's why we have also built in the mechanism for anonymous feedback. There's like a Google form that people can provide feedback if they're not able to stay for educational autopsy, or if they want to provide something constructive that they don't feel comfortable staying out loud.
Yeah, very famously, when we started, our former associate chair of education gave the feedback when we were bringing this up, being like, I hate getting evaluated on my talks like this, but we also all recognize that this is important and that we need to do it. All faculty have not always loved it because, you know, sometimes feedback can be hard, but it has really improved a lot of it has improved overall the quality of our didactic series, and no one should be safe. If we're going to do it for anyone, we should do it for everyone. To Chad's point about grad rounds.
I think it's also really important, as I mentioned to you earlier, just normalizing the culture of feedback in your program. And when everybody is eligible to get feedback, I think it helps contribute to that culture of it just being expected.
I love that and 100% agree. In the culmination at the end of you guys' educational autopsy, does the committee generate like a rating for the faculty, like exceeds expectation, meets expectation, below expectation, or they are just kind of the written kind of summative comments from the residents and you guys?
They do, in fact. We do, like, basically with the perspective that we want to give folks sort of like a benchmark, but we're also not here to sort of like give a 1 to 5 scale, because as sort of Max alluded to before, that hasn't like broadly been helpful. We do give pretty much a perspective of, hey, are you like meeting expectation for a really good lecture? Are you exceeding those expectations? Are there areas for improvement? And sort of give them designations in that way. We also try to like have a mark like at the end of it for, is this the sort of talk that at a moment's notice could be performed at a regional or national conference? It's that high level quality. So we can give folks those kudos of, we sat back and we really love this. I know we're giving you this feedback about all the little things you could do better, but this is extremely high quality and with a few improvements is amazing.
Well, thank you guys. Like I said, I enjoyed your presentation. I plan on borrowing some of your ideas for my own institution. I think they're really fantastic. Are there any additional last questions for our speakers? If not, Andrea, I think we can go ahead and end our session.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks for
Thanks
being
guys.
here.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah.
Bye-bye.